Hey friends, it's Brett, and back with another episode of Seeking Our Spirit. Got a great episode for you today. Sat down with a longtime friend of mine, Mr. John Montuori, and we had a lot of fun, great chat. So I hope that you really enjoy that. And as always, come and support the show. Come be on the show. All of you have a story and you have a journey. And it's always interesting and fascinating. And so come on out and tell your story. If you want to do that, contact me at seekingourspirit@gmail.com. Also to inquire about spiritual direction, or if you just want to tell a story so that we can share it on the show and we can talk about it, call me at 615-933-9737. Appreciate all the love and support. Keep hitting the like button, sharing the episodes, support button, all that stuff. We're on YouTube now as well, so please go and subscribe there. That'll help us too. So hope you enjoy. You all take care. All right, my friend, John Montuori. Welcome, sir. Good to have you. I was thinking on the way over here as well. I think I start almost all my episodes this way, which is annoying, but we have known each other in the church and been friends probably like 13, 14 years.
I'd say longer than that.
Yeah.
This year's 18 years of marriage for me.
Yeah.
And we started the year after we got married. And I'd say you probably started at Ascension around 2008.
It was 2008, yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a long time. So, but one of the great joys for me and blessings of doing this kind of personal project is, even though we've known each other that long, had all kinds of good conversations, gone through things together, never sat for an hour and like talked about stuff like this. I mean, somewhat, but
sure.
You know, more just over a beer and just talking. So yeah. I'm excited for this. So thanks for doing it.
Yeah.
So why don't you, since other folks listening don't know you, why don't you just give us brief, I'm John, this is what I do, this is where I'm from.
Sure.
Bio.
Well, I'm John Montuori. My primary professional function is I'm a leadership and sales trainer. And so I've hopped around different media companies throughout Knoxville and sort of throughout the country now. And I just go in, I evaluate culture, and I try to help make cultural changes to improve people's productivity through leadership and through sales.
Mm-hmm. And you're originally from Connecticut?
Originally from Connecticut.
Came down here for UT? Right.
Yeah, to finish my degree. So I actually was working in Manhattan until August 11th, 2001. And a buddy of mine was transferring to UT. And so I told him I would come down and visit, and I ended up liking it. So I moved to Knoxville on August 12th, 2001. And then September 11th happened, and I used to work downtown.
Wow.
So it was kind of like divine, because I wasn't like in the towers.
Never knew
but
that.
I was close enough that I would have been stuck there for quite a while.
Look at that. I never knew that.
There you go.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. And husband and father and outdoor enthusiast these days.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Cool.
Middle-aged, Jeep owner. Yeah. 70s rock. Yeah.
Nice. Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, to dive in, so, a show about spirituality, for me, it's exploring what in the world we mean when we say that word. And so hearing people's stories and hearing how people think about that or experience that in their life is kind of my aim. So when John Montuori thinks of that word, spirituality, what comes to mind, or what memories do you have in terms of, like, when did that become conscious for you? Was it through church? Did you just always grow up with a sense of God, higher power, creator? Where does that begin for you?
Well, the first word that I think of when I think about spirituality today at 44 years old is malleable.
Yeah.
Because it has taken different shapes in different stages of my life.
Yeah.
And I grew up Lutheran. My mom was, German Lutheran. My dad is Italian Catholic.
Yeah.
And so we grew up going to Lutheran church.
Was that ELCA, or do you know?
I don't even know.
It wasn't like strict, like.
No, we were not strict. It was very casual.
It was ELCA.
And so I grew up going to Sunday school, being very involved in youth group. You know that, like, from my experience in church with you, once I put my foot in the door, I'm like all in.
Yeah.
So I'm on the vestry. I'm in other brothers. I'm everywhere. So, I was like that. I started like that as a kid. And I went on a spiritual retreat in San Antonio, Texas, River of Light. And then, I became a shitty teenager and young adult. And I really didn't put any thought into revisiting that until I got married. And so in 2008, when you started coming to Ascension, I started at almost the same time.
Yeah.
And Episcopal was close enough to Lutheran that it wasn't really a big jump.
Yeah.
But for me, more attractive because I grew up outside New York with heavy Catholic influence.
Right.
And Italian influence. So the fact that Episcopal was more traditional in nature and that there were stained glass windows and that we honor the saints and light candles and use the font, all those things I felt were bringing me back to church, back to spirituality.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. So great. Before we jump up to that point in life, though, in terms of church involvement, that sort of thing. But do you? And the answer can totally be no. But did you have any sense of personal spiritual life, like growing up, childhood, adolescence, teenager, that kind of stuff, college, like anything like that?
Yeah. So as the folks would say down here in the South, I was certainly as a child and growing up like a God-fearing Christian.
Yeah.
Right. And had a deep sense of spirituality for what you can have, in that age. I think where it became kind of malleable is when I started coming to the Episcopal Church, I started really relying on some of these traditional church experiences to bring me back to that spirituality.
Yeah.
And I started learning that church and spirituality can sometimes have nothing to do with one another.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And so that's why, and I remember being in a newcomers class with you and Father Howard and several young couples that we've become friends with and known throughout the years. And Father Howard said, the beauty about the Episcopal Church is that we expect people to stray or to get off path. And our hope is that people come back.
Right.
But it's kind of like the expectation that we're expected to doubt and to explore.
Yeah.
And so that was always kind of really meaningful for me. And I think it wasn't until that conversation at Glenn and Megan Vesser's house we'd already been members of Ascension for close to a year at that point.
Yeah.
And that's when it went from the tangible actions of church practice to revisiting it as more of a spiritual practice.
Okay. Wow. That's okay. Yeah. So all the way up till there, it really was like spirituality for John was like through the lens of the church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, gosh. I mean, so I just want to make sure though, like, so in adolescence, teenage years and stuff, you didn't have sort of like dark night of the soul wandering.
No, I'm there today. No, none of that then.
Well, I've been through a lot of them, so I can walk with you. That's so funny. Okay, so then I guess from introduction into the Episcopal Church, and as you say, spirituality for the first time for you becomes sort of not divorced from, but it isn't necessarily married to or dependent upon organized religion, right? I mean, you can go on a Sunday and it be the most spiritual thing you've ever experienced, or absolutely not.
Yep.
Just like life can be, some massive spiritual moment, or you just walk through it sort of like a zombie, right?
I have this like weird perception of it all, right? So church is community. And usually when you find your church home, it's because you have found a group of people who share values, whom you can connect with and worship together. Mm-hmm. But if that leads you to spirituality, great. But I think it's more of a shared spirituality.
Yeah.
Whereas as a middle-aged man, as someone who has taken a deep interest in psychology, someone who has had, a psychologist and professional mentor for over 15 years. I'm now at a point where I'm linking spirituality with identity. And so what I find is I'm never going to get a sense of identity from sitting in kneelers in a pew, or taking communion or anything like that. And I enjoy a church setting because it brings me closer to other people who want to be close to God.
Yeah.
But what I'm learning is, and as a father, this is what my professional mentor, told me, and I've taken this with me, and I think you will too. It is a father's responsibility to install a sense of identity in their son. And I don't know that many men maybe recognize that that's their responsibility. And if you look around in our society today, I think a big challenge is men who lack a sense of identity, a sense of healthy masculine identity.
Well, I mean, a lot of guys our age probably don't even have that for themselves.
They don't.
Who know who they are. Right.
So now at 44 years old, as I'm revisiting this level of spirituality again, cyclically, I'm having these like aha moments. Yeah. And it's interesting.
Yeah, there's a bunch there. I mean, it makes me think. I mean, one thing you said, like, you said you're not going to get that in the pew. I mean, you can get that in the pews. It's just not the only place you get that.
Like, but you don't get it physically through like I kneeled and it came through my knees.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can. But I think the practice itself is supposed to bring you, or open you up to receive the Spirit.
Yes.
But I think you can do that outside of church as well.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Well, to me, the thing I'm harping on all the time is that the whole point of the service is so that you are opened, realize your identity, and then go and do that and be that in the world. Yeah. Like live that way all the time. Yeah. Which I know is easy to say. But the other thing about identity, about people. Yeah. I mean, the only glimpse that I even get of that in people's lives, in fathers' lives, is that sort of like, got to make a man out of them, you know? But I don't know that they're taking that statement as deeply as we're talking about it, right?
Yeah. I'm a very progressive individual, and I like to think of myself as very, open-minded, accepting. But I also do believe we have a crisis in our culture that is centered around masculinity. And usually, if you say the word masculinity out loud, out in public, the first thing people think of is toxic masculinity. And we've gone down that road so far that no one has decided to balance that with healthy masculinity. And so I think we're seeing that, we're seeing what the results of that can be. And I think it's, going back to it's the father's responsibility to install a sense of identity in their son. I can only do that if I have a sense of my own identity.
Right.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you got to turn in. Do the work on yourself, man. Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. You remind me in that statement of studies that happened, 10, 15 years ago, but it surprised people when this came out, because they said, in terms of church studies, the number one, absolutely by far, the number one factor that determined whether or not a child, not just a boy, right, or a child as they grow later in life, if they go to church, is if their father went to church.
Not their mother.
Yeah. Which is fascinating. But it sort of gets to that identity piece there, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't even about if the father taught them about stuff or what, but if the father modeled.
Or was present.
Right.
Just being present is something that we struggle with in society today, and not physical presence, but, people that are distracted with work or their cell phone or social media, they're not present. And I'm guilty of it as well. And I think I'm like in this stretch, right? I'm like in this, I'm like finishing a year's worth of personal work where I'm recognizing how disconnected I was.
Yeah.
And, you and you and I have had offline conversations about, changes in friend groups and people playing different roles during different periods of your life. And that has been a big theme for me this year. And it was interesting that there's a show that I don't even watch called like The Good Doctor.
Yeah.
And I saw a preview recently. And the quote that the guy says is, "It is very hard to lose people you thought would never leave. We have to find a way to keep going for the people we still have." And that resonated with me, because you can get yourself so wrapped up in what you think you're losing that you lose sight of what is there.
Yeah, yeah.
And, yours and my reconnection in the last 6 months was kind of apropos for that reason.
Yeah. I hear that for sure. Yeah. Well, not to go into our stories, but yeah, that's a bigger statement than people probably realize. Oh, man, you gave me something there a minute ago I was going to tap into. That work. Well, I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the
Sure.
journey you've been on and the work you've been doing, and like sort of what you're gleaning from that? I guess part of what I was hearing too, which I think is really important to always name and point out for people, and I guess we've sort of danced around this already in this conversation, but so the distraction, I'm going to try to connect these things together, but I guess part of what I'm exploring in this process, in this project of trying to understand what is spirituality, and I say these things all the time, but it's just another angle into it. In another way, what isn't spiritual, right? And part of what I hear really in our religion, Christianity, hearing what Jesus was pointing us to and talking about, and people who I admire and really listen to, like Richard Rohr and other voices, is that they're saying, so Richard Rohr is fond of saying mystical, he uses the word mystical all the time, but he's saying mystical is just experience. He's saying, in other words, I'm hearing Jesus saying the kingdom of God is right here in your hand. Right. If you'll only wake up to it, if you'll only reach out and grab it. And we do so much, and this is a whole other rabbit trail to go down, but we do so much in Christianity of focusing all our energies and efforts towards getting to the yellow brick road, getting to that heaven that's way out somewhere, that God that's up in the clouds, that right, you're concentrating so much on this other thing that you miss what you have and what's in front of you. So I don't know. I guess I'm rambling, but I just I don't connect there.
Yeah, no, that paints a pretty clear, picture for me, especially when you talk about like we're working towards this like long-term goal and losing sight of what we're supposed to be doing right here, right now.
Yeah.
And, like in the last year, I'm looking right now at this Joseph Campbell book, right? The Power of the Myth. Joseph Campbell has played a really significant role in my journey, right? Like, the cave, that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. And that's Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, shadow work,
right? Ego work, ego versus self, tie the self back to the identity. These are all things that I've been re-exploring and diving back into. I think over the last year, what I have learned is that I've spent a really long time, an unimaginable, almost like an uncountable amount of time, relying on external validation. And so I have learned academically, cognitively in my brain that the only way through spirituality is through the self. And although I know that academically, I really struggle. Today, I'm very much struggling to feel that. Yeah. And I think, it's almost like a curse. Like, I love psychology, and I can follow all the psychology accounts and read all the books and it's everything. And I can know all of these things academically. The more I know academically, the harder it is for me to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's sort of that same thing we were just talking about. There's the knowing and experiencing are different things, right? We can talk spirituality all day. We can talk theology all day, but what's real is the experiencing of it. It's the living it.
Right.
Man, yeah, that's
deep waters there, right?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Wasn't expecting that today.
No. Totally. It's just, I think the church if I can be critical of church with the big C, I feel as a priest that we also fail to encourage and provide those experiences for people too.
That's interesting. I will challenge you and say your job is only to set the stage, and it is not even possible for you to deliver that.
Yeah.
And so, I think when I think of church, when I think of my sabbaticals from church, and when I think of coming back to church, it's more about being in that physical space, doing these physical practices once again to lead me back to a sense of internal spirituality. So am counting beads on a rosary, lighting candles, licking stained glass windows, doing anything I can to bring me back there. And sometimes all of those like tangible, physical, traditional things help open you back up.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I would be on this journey had you and I not had a beer almost a year ago and kind of, reignited some of this.
Yeah. 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 That's a good point. I mean, certain things can be almost touchstones, physical cues that help us get back into that sort of state of mind or heart place. That's helpful. I mean, and I hear and experience what you're saying too, in that this like a Sunday morning sort of sets a stage. What the people get or receive or feel or take from that in a large way, in a big way, depends on sort of like what headspace, heart space you're in, intentionality that you have when you enter. Yeah, you can just go through the motions, or it can be an invitation into the cave.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I keep having so many thoughts and keep telling myself I'm going to go back, but then I lose them. They'll come. But anyway.
So here we're here talking about spirituality, and now the church, right?
Malleable, right?
Yeah. So you had said something about when you deliver sermons.
Yeah.
I am not a big theology person. I did not go to seminary, and I'm typically a liar if I tell you that I know anything.
Yeah.
Like I can't quote the Bible in very many ways. I rely on sermons to tell me a story from the Bible and tie it to real life so that I can apply it. Yeah. But once again, like you're the storyteller, and I'm the receiver, and I'm supposed to learn from that story. It's kind of like if you go to a therapist, they can help point you in a direction that you need to travel down, but if you never take the first step, that's on you.
Yeah. So have you delved into in your life like different prayer practices, different methods, different ways of trying to get to that thing? Yeah.
I read Jay Shetty's book, Think Like a Monk. You ever?
Oh, okay. I know that. I didn't. Yeah.
I feel like, at several times of my life, I've explored just simply out of curiosity, like different religions, different practices. I myself would love to like go on a little like eat, pray, love mission. Yeah. Always hungry for that experience.
But have you just read about those things, or have you done the experiences? Like, have you tried certain practices on for size?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mindfulness is a big one and a challenging one. For me,
for sure.
I took a lot of things from the Jay Shetty book, but I'm just having trouble remembering other practices. But I bought my wife like this, like bed of nails mat, to like, it's supposed to really help you become centered. She's used it 0 times, but I've used it many times, and it's interesting. It's like you're losing. The longer you're on it, and it is not a comfortable thing, right? It's all spikes that you're laying on. The longer you're there, and the more you focus on being introspective, the physical pain goes away. And I think that's the point of it. And so that's that's an Eastern practice. So yeah, there I am laying on my floor on this bed of nails, waiting for spirituality to hit me again. It feels a lot better to lick the stained glass window than to lay in the nails, but I'll do whatever.
Where'd you get lick the stained
I just made that up.
Oh man, yeah. Well, so can you pull out from? I mean, it's interesting because it's almost like, I don't want to use too heavy a words here, but like spiritual awakening in a sense in your life has come later.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like from then to now, what have been the ebbs and flows? What have been the mountains and valleys? Where's the?
Well, you had said something earlier about like just going through the motions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of our life is going through motions, right? Like if you're a grown adult and you have kids, the motions are go to work, take kids wherever they need to go, go to sleep, wake up, start over.
Right.
And so, going back to like being a God-fearing Christian, I think I was just going through the Christian motions and mistaking that for many, many years for spirituality. And just because I believe in God is not necessarily evidence of my spirituality.
Yeah.
And I think, so you're correct. I think like up until this point, even though I have always considered myself a Christian and I try to model my behavior and the way that I conduct myself in my relationships in a similar way, I am at a point now where I'm open to and seeking and have an appetite for that awakening.
Yeah. Yeah.
When was your awakening?
Yeah,
Are you still waiting on it?
Weird. Yeah, no. I've tried to pinpoint these things before, but I was that weird kid that, well, I didn't realize this was different or weird until later in life. I just thought everybody lived the same way. But like I don't even remember this stuff. But like I would be asking questions about, about God. And some of this is my parents, like I was read the Bible stories and these things, but I like apparently used to go up to strangers in malls and like tell them Bible stories and like just weird stuff like that. So yeah, so I don't know, but in terms of like my conscious sort of, I would probably point to like middle school. I mean, at least in terms of like a concrete example, at that time we did confirmation classes like in 6th grade. And I just happened to have some wonderful folks that were our youth leaders that also helped, sort of taught pieces of the confirmation class. And they introduced us to meditation then. And I remember that sort of turning inside and that being in silence and breathing and all that sort of,
So, okay, so that's interesting. So, maybe I'm not looking for my first spiritual awakening, but maybe my most profound. So, last August, I took a leap of faith sort of and went on this 5-day whitewater rafting trip on the Green River, starting in Vernal, Utah, with 16 strangers that I had never met before. Joe Hawley, who was a center for the Atlanta Falcons, was like the leader of this group of misfits. And on like over the course, it was like completely off grid.
Yeah.
Your cell phone was just a camera and that was it. And to be that disconnected from society, I think is almost essential for you to be able to receive an awakening of any kind. But while I was there, like, the days were, floating down the river, the nights were, putting up tents and, very primitive style camping. And we practiced mindfulness and we practiced meditation, and Joe led us on 2 or 3 different shamanic journeys, which were so foreign to me.
Yeah.
And everyone else had these like beautifully illustrated experiences. And I was looking around and I was like, these people are full of crap, but I walked away from that experience. Like that was the closest. That was the, like maybe an appetizer or a taste of, you need to spend more time doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the road there.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of a couple things. Like earlier, we were talking about like distraction in terms of technology and cell phones. It's funny because, yeah, it's like our society and culture now, and our level of how tapped in we are to technology, distracts us from being present to life, being present to love, being present to the people who are with us all the time. And it's weird. It's like going away like that sort of helps you. It's sort of a foil. It sort of helps you see, oh, yeah, no, like being with people is the special thing.
Yeah.
Relationship is the special thing, but it's like you have to take it away to realize it. Same with you got to take this away these phones away to realize, that. So I think that's interesting and important. What was the last little part you said there?
That it was like an appetizer, that's the road that I need to travel down to have a broader experience. Talking about primitive camping, strangers, shamanic journeys.
I think, well, I don't know. And I don't, not you and I, if I even say this word, we could go down and talk about this for the entire episode, which I don't want to do. But in some ways, a lot of what we're talking about, I feel like that's why I connected so much with the Enneagram.
Yes. That's a rabbit hole.
I know. Yeah, we'll be careful. But like, because it to me, some of the phrases you used earlier, the Enneagram brought me into that work.
Gotcha.
Like, so the shadow stuff, I think that's why, right? Like you've heard me say many times to tell people, don't take a test, read the descriptions and you'll know because it hurts when you read it. It's because it's showing you that part of you it's that place you don't want to go.
Right.
Right. And being invited into that and doing that work.
Speaking of places you don't want to go. So Brene Brown had said when she got famous on that first TED Talk. Yeah. Now she's like a household name.
That's was about vulnerability, wasn't it?
It was about and shame. And so she's a sociologist that was doing this deep study on how shame influences people's behavior. Yeah. And so she, in that TED Talk, she defines shame as the fear of being unworthy and disconnection, right? If someone knew this about me, I would not be worthy of love and belonging, and I would be disconnected. And that's what shame is. And so, and like you're mentioning the Enneagram, and the one that you read that hurts is the most accurate one. I think shame can be a much broader term. I think people only associate it with like, I've done something bad. Right. But it could just be, parts of you that you yourself don't love or like very much. And if you allow it to, it can interrupt the relationships, the meaningful relationships that you have, because you're afraid that it will make you unworthy of love and belonging. Right.
When the truth is, it's exactly the opposite. Being open and vulnerable and naming those things. Well, I mean, the most simple cliche way of saying is the truth will set you free.
Absolutely.
Right. Bringing that stuff into the light is what then makes you, this is what I attempted to say last Sunday, like bringing that stuff back into the light makes you whole.
Yeah. Well, shame cannot tolerate being talked about. Yeah. And the more you talk about it, the less you have it. Right. And I think, again, at the end of that TED Talk, she talks about this group of people who felt worthy and felt that they were worthy of love and connection, were not afraid to make themselves vulnerable. They felt like being vulnerable is what made them beautiful. Yeah. And so I think, that has played a big role in this like year-long slugfest of trying to rediscover identity, rediscover spirituality, all in an effort to hopefully install it in my son.
Yeah. It's interesting that observation you had of going on that retreat or experience with that group of people, and that you felt you had a different take, or you were leaving with something different, had a different reaction than they did. It makes me think, I mean, it's part of what gets talked about in these episodes. And it sort of it ties into Enneagram stuff though, too. I just wonder how much of that could be explained by like so-and-so, those people were a bunch of whatever number and you're a whatever number.
Yeah.
Like just our different way of interacting with stuff. Same way within these episodes, I'm always telling people that what has come through very strongly for me in chatting with people about this subject is what I call the languages God uses to talk to us. And I find there's a whole spectrum out there of people who, like, for some people, that language is just this one thing. I know it's God when this thing happens. It could be like gut feeling.
Yeah.
And other people, it's just this one thing. But then there's this whole spectrum of people that, like, they can name different times in their life where they felt that they were being guided or led or spoken to, whatever words you want to put on it, through, again, what I call different languages, whether that's coincidence or audible experience or gut feeling, or, I mean, you can name tons of them. So I don't know. I just wonder how that might apply to your.
I kind of wondered, I stuck out like a sore thumb on this trip. Everyone else was a lot further down this journey of self-discovery than I was. And I was like just getting started. And I even had someone who I really grew to like over the course of these 5 days, based on a particular experience. She's like, and this isn't bad, but you are a little bit rigid. And I'm like, that is the first person in my life to ever describe me as rigid, but she was 100% right.
Yeah.
Like, I was there pretending to be open while all the while being scared to death.
Yeah.
It was just not people, you can drop me in a crowd of strangers and I make friends pretty easy.
Right.
But like, the mission and the people that were there, even though they were the warmest, kindest, nicest people, I was so intimidated by how much more connected they felt they were, right? And so if I were to do that trip again tomorrow with a new group of strangers or even with people I know, I think I would be a lot more receptive having gone through it one time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, playing with some of that, like, I mean, are there moments in life that you can point to that you felt closest to God? And what?
So I'm gonna be. I feel like, in some way, this is probably counter to everything I've said so far. Where I'm like trying to escape like external validation and realize that everything is supposed to come from within. I have felt the most connected to God through connection with other people. Like, I feel very close to God right now with you.
Yeah.
Our connection leaves me feeling fulfilled and abundant. Yeah. And I am the least connected with God when I feel disconnected, excluded, isolated. And one of the reasons I have come to this congregation is to seek that connection again, because I strayed really far.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that relationship, because that actually is it's a very common, again, quote unquote, language that I hear people express, that they experience God in relationship with other people. It's really fascinating for me because I though I see that now in my life, I didn't at an early age. I was okay with isolating and pulling. Somehow I could pull from God from within, or and now I see the value in those relationships. But so that was like a new language for me to sort of learn in people. But anyway, I'm just sort of validating. That's very common that I hear that from people. It also sort of makes a little bit of sense that, like, that doesn't come overnight, right? Like that takes time. There has to be trust. There has to be vulnerability. There has to be accountability in relationships, I think, to sort of get to a level where you experience that. So it would make sense, like, you're not going to get to that level with all those hippies on a river, you know what I mean, in a couple of days, you know what I mean?
Yeah. But it was
no
fun
offense,
to see.
hippies. I love hippies.
No, yeah. I was right there trying to be one. I just fish out of water, though.
Yeah. So relationship and community, you're naming.
Yeah. I mean, I obviously, like, the person, the relationship I experience God the most in is my wife.
Yeah.
And then next most, my son. Because they just simply both provide a very visible, tangible miracle to me. Yeah. And those are the ones that you take the most for granted.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know,
so like
hurts,
going back to that quote, like, I could be really focused on other changes in social circle settings and things like that. But it is very hard to lose people you thought would never leave. We have to find a way to keep going for the people we still have.
Yeah.
And again, that quote, I'm sure that whoever wrote that for CBS did not intend for it to be as profound as it is. But look how easy it is to stray from God, in the sense of like, look how easy it is to overlook
take for granted
or
everything.
take for granted the people who are closest to you, who have proven to you time and time again
Right.
that you have that connection.
Yeah.
But I think so many of us are still have this insatiable appetite. I just spoke for a lot of people. I know me.
It's okay.
I have this insatiable appetite, and I realize it's probably coming from that lack of identity.
Yeah, that's a good. I was just gonna say it's just a human brokenness thing, but that's another step of lack of identity, perhaps as an explanation for that. Yeah, and it's rough. I mean, it's not only they're the ones that we most take for granted or overlook, but often the ones we most hurt too. Like, we've never hurt anyone that way,
Right.
And these people that we're closest to get the brunt of that. This is something you said a long time ago, made me think, and I think it sort of touches this as well. But people seeking fulfillment, right? A lot of our society and culture is just seeking fulfillment materially, basically, or accomplishing success. And it's funny because, like you just said, that quote probably wasn't intended to be that profound. I don't know why this is. I keep doing this in my life recently, where like I'm in cliches all the time, going, oh my gosh, that is so true and real and profound.
Yeah.
And so this is the same thing. Like, we're taught our whole lives, and we get intellectually, like, money doesn't make you happy, right?
Right.
That doesn't
but
bring
watch me go to
happiness.
work and make it.
Right. I know. And we get that intellectually, but not until you really experience this point of like, oh yeah, like, I mean, none of us are like filthy rich or whatever, but like, we have all our needs met. We're fine.
Yeah.
And like, there's nothing of value in it other than maybe like feeling like you're providing for your family,
Right.
and giving them what they need. Right. But, and then that's just where we're like, oh wait, it reminds me of like, of course I'm going to talk about the Packers, unfortunately, but like Aaron Rodgers, who I'm still upset with, when he won the Super Bowl, there was this great thing that he wrote, or somebody interviewed him. And I think it gets to a lot of what we're talking about. For a football player like that, like that's everything. Like you've worked more than any of us know how to work, right?
Sure.
To get to the position where you could even approach that, to even get to the pros, right? And literally on the bus, in that moment, just following that Super Bowl win, he's already going, this can't be all there is.
Yeah.
This can't be it. Like getting the thing you worked so hard for and then realizing it's empty and meaningless.
Yeah.
Isn't
that crazy? We make careers and lives out of, I think you could probably agree, I enjoy what I do. Mm-hmm. And I do believe to some degree that I impact the people that I train, whether it's, sales training or leadership training, or developing younger people in their professional lives. I find that to be, or I have found it to be fulfilling. Mm-hmm. But in the last year or so, I also am recognizing like I am absolutely not listening to my calling.
Yeah.
I am not doing what I was put here to do. And I have got to figure out how to make that transition without compromising my family's quality of life.
Yeah.
But I really do think I'm on the verge of something.
Yeah.
Going back to that retreat, like I left that experience in such a state of like awe, mm-hmm. and like a little bit of disbelief, a little bit of excitement. And I thought I believe that I could plan trips like this. I don't know that I could really like lead all of these people to a spiritual awakening, but I could certainly invite others to do that.
Yeah.
But what I know that I'm good at is organizing that type of thing and evangelizing it and setting the stage for people to be vulnerable in a comfortable way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I need to be doing more of.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because is it really about the whatever ceremony or thing or whatever, or is it more about just modeling and inviting people into that vulnerability and authenticity, right?
So there's a book that I kind of live my life by. Tell me if you were you going to say something first before I say
just
this?
was going to say it's interesting because much like a lot of things we're talking about, like that actually, well, I don't know. I don't know what your professional world really looks like. I live in a bubble.
Yeah.
But that could be done
Yeah.
in everyday
Yeah.
ways.
But I don't think in corporate America
Okay.
people are willing to be that vulnerable, which is funny because now Brene Brown, after doing that TED Talk, has become a corporate speaker. And she's like sitting in conference rooms, in board meetings, inviting people to be vulnerable at work, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
But
This is what we do. We take the beautiful thing and ruin it, right?
exactly. There's a book. It's 72 pages, and I think everyone should read it in their life. And it's called The Knight in Rusty Armor.
Oh, yeah. You've told me about this.
I have. I'm going to force you to read it. I really think I could use the framework of that book to lay out and organize an event that people could participate in and simultaneously be opened up to receive more. Mm-hmm. And it will be up to them to receive it or not, right? Mm-hmm. But, again, I think that whole book is about a journey. That book is about a knight who has hidden behind his armor for so long.
Yeah.
He doesn't even know who he is anymore.
Yeah.
And the whole book is about how he removes it.
Well, and the twisted thing is awesome, right? You remove the armor. We just start putting on more armor. Like this is lifelong.
Yeah.
That journey and that process of doing it. What's so sad of taking the armor off or entering into the cave. What's so sad is so many people in our world never even realize there is a cave or that they are wearing an armor or a mask.
Have zero interest in entering the Castle of Silence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, and then yet you actually our entire life it's not we have to do it again and again and again and again. I mean, I see this everywhere, right? It's like the church. I often feel like we've done this with organized religion. We have what Jesus did and taught and was, and then and that was meant to like continue and to be lived, but we took it and said, let's set this aside and just replay it again and again, and maybe something magical will happen.
Right.
No. It was supposed to just like change everyone, and then we go out and live it and do it.
Right.
Yeah. And you could point to so many places where we do that in life. Just put it in a little bottle and keep it. You know?
And I think, I think everyone has the opportunity to get there, right? Some people it may take until they're like at the gate, right? For them to actually enter the cave or take the armor off. I think a lot of people, if I'm doing it at 44, it's probably better than doing it at 54. But man, I wish I would have done it at 34.
Yeah. It reminds me of Roar sort of falling upward. I don't know if you ever read that.
I haven't, but I know of it.
Yeah, and he uses the image of a container. The first half of life, he's not meaning age, is about like constructing this container. It's the boundaries and the rules and the stuff. It's sort of the establishing the identity.
Yeah. And
And then the second half of life is realizing you don't need
That
that
was all
container, and you got to break all of that, right? And break out of that. I guess both just in this conversation and also as an aside to you, and you and I can talk more about this outside of this, but I feel like some of what you're talking about, or even hungry for, or at least you would click with it, is spiritual direction. Mm-hmm. And what's really cool is there are also like models for group spiritual direction, which I participate in a group that does that. And it's very, you're committed to being together every week, whether you want to or not. I usually don't want to at 6:30 in the morning.
Right.
And yet we go there and we have a little ceremony which basically means lighting a fire, but we set that and mark that space, and then we check in, and sometimes you don't have much, and sometimes you bring some heavy stuff, and we hold that, together.
And the older I get, the more value I place on that level of depth in my relationships. And it is such a gift when someone matches that to you. And you can't expect them to do it forever.
Yeah.
Right. But you have to appreciate every time they do it. And, I think that as we continue to age, and I think it becomes increasingly more important that the majority of your connections are of depth and less of superficial things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of your name. Like, I could feel my stomach as we're talking, like getting nervous. Like I can't imagine getting older in life and just feeling like I just have surface
level relationships with everybody.
Yeah. That's horrifying.
I think, and so if people experience God, I mean, if it were me, and I had said earlier, like, I really feel the most connected to God through connection and relationships. If I made it until I was 85 years old and all the relationships I had in my entire life were surface level, I personally don't know that I would have ever felt spiritual or connected to God. But that's not everybody. Other people, monks can be in isolation for their entire lives and be connected to God.
Right.
It just wouldn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So. Do you think that's the only, so that's obviously the main, can you think of other examples in your life of like where you felt connected to God or creator or felt guided, whatever that?
The nature part of me, which is new, right? Like I grew up outside New York and I expected like my entire life to be inside the concrete jungle and moved to Knoxville. And even still for 10 years living in Knoxville, didn't take advantage of the amazing place that we live in. And then, it started with me mountain biking. A friend of mine introduced me to mountain biking. I never dreamt in a million years that I would like it, let alone love it. And then I started doing more hiking. And then that wasn't enough. So I started planning these trips out west, which you and I have had conversations about. Yeah. And on a lot of these trips, visiting these places for the first time and just being in absolute awe of some of these things, I get very connected to God there. And so my wife, Catherine, last year, the year before, we hiked Zion. We were in Zion. We hiked the Narrows. Yeah. And for people that don't know, you're hiking through a slot canyon that has a river running through it, and you are working against the river. Oh yeah. And you're knee deep. You're not jumping on rocks. You're wading against running water.
Jeez.
And
and how salmon feel.
I know. And it was but every single part of it was mind blowing. Yeah. The canyon was mind blowing. The temperature of the water was mind blowing. Yeah. The physical exertion it required was mind blowing. And then you reach whatever your destination is on that hike, and you look backwards and you're like, I cannot believe I got here. Yeah. And so Catherine, whenever we tell the story of being on that trip, she says, she's like, I had a spiritual awakening on that trip.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And I love to explore the mechanics of that and what is that? I mean, there's the beauty and there's the awe, but there's also this speaking of connection, becoming or feeling reconnected to really what we're all a part of.
Yeah,
right?
what God created.
Yeah.
The earth and nature.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good example. Can you think of others at all?
No. Yeah. So I think, that's part of the journey.
Two of the big ones.
I think up until the last few years where I've recently decided that you can connect with spirituality through nature and through what God created. Before that, it was all about connection. Mm-hmm. So I'm hoping that there doesn't have to be a lot more chapters before I get to experience that my spirituality comes from within.
Yeah, yeah.
But I could be tomorrow, you have to, eat rocks to get spirituality. I hope I don't get there, but...
Yeah. So. Yeah, I don't know why I'm going to this, but somewhere you made me think of this. Maybe we'll connect it, but in some ways, I think that's what I like about. Have you done much ice bath stuff? Have we talked about this?
I refuse.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I did swim a mile race in Lake Tahoe, which I think is enough of an ice bath for the rest of my life. Yeah. But cheers to you for doing it.
Well, it's not. I don't want to preach on ice bath stuff right now, but it's okay. I'll just say this: the only real benefit I think that it provides is you cannot do anything else in that moment but be within yourself.
Right. Like physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's something with that ties into sort of the conversation we're having. Like, in a way, and to put it another way, it forces, you cannot be distracted.
Yeah.
You know? All you can do in that, it's so cold and it's so horrible that all you can do in that moment is be right here in your heart and breathe.
Right.
And I think that's the real.
Interesting. I mean, that's obviously why I lay on like a Shakti mat, bed of nails. But I still find that more appealing than an ice bath.
It's not appealing ever.
No, and I admire everyone. Like I've seen, there's no doubt that like the reason this is, becoming so popular is because people are having these outrageous experiences. So maybe at some point, I'll throw myself in there. But I think you're right. I think like when you have to put your body through physical pain so that you could disassociate with the pain and go within, that is could potentially be a really critical part of connecting with that spirituality.
Yeah, what's coming to light for me now, it's interesting. I think we've been dancing around this a little bit, but like that thing that happens, so call it being centered, right? You have to be centered in that moment. It's sort of the key thing, I think, and maybe this is what we mean also by turning in. That's sort of the key element in everything we're talking about. Like, so you could, I mean, I know it's harder, like in Zion National Park or whatever, to do this, but one could walk through there and not have that awe.
Sure.
Right? You can have these relationships with people. It's the centeredness, I think, that brings that vulnerability and that authenticity in that relationship. It could just be surface level, as we talked about already.
Sure.
In a way, that's sort of what I see happening in mindfulness practices. It's to be centered and to experience and take in life. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm just playing with this as we're going. But
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I said it earlier, I struggle with mindfulness and meditation.
We all do.
Yeah.
I always teach people that what we call the hidden Christ. It's essentially mindfulness. It's just sort of Christ-based, but it's the easiest practice to describe, but I call it like the black belt practice because you can't, I mean, you're supposed to, every person you interact with, as we're talking, I'm going, I see Christ in you. That's way easy to say. It's super hard to do.
Yeah.
In the busyness of everyday life, but it has that same effect, I think. It's centering. It's also, in a way, to say, I see Christ in this person, even if you don't like them. It's invoking sort of that, like, oh, all is holy.
Right.
All is sacred.
Right. Yeah. God made this person the same way that they made me. He made me. They, he, whoever.
Yeah. Can you think of any other languages, examples, moments in life that is John's spirituality? Are there particular practices that have really resonated with you that you?
And this is kind of like a newer interest of mine, but and it's probably as, I don't want to say far-fetched as Enneagrams, but like, like you can uncover a practice like that and like dive in and be all about it. I think that there's a lot to like totems and spirit animals.
Yeah.
And I think we can learn a lot about the way that particular animals interact either with each other or with animals and creatures of different types. But so we're toying with the idea of going to Alaska this year. Cool. I don't know if that will happen.
Yeah.
But while I'm there, what I want to do the most is see as much like wildlife as possible. I want to see the grizzly bear, and I want to see the moose and the elk and the puffins and whatever's there. I want to observe, not in a zoo, but like in God's world, how they interact. And learn from it, and kind of like, you get to, like the Enneagram, like you take the pieces of it that inspire you and you carry them with you. And I think with like these, the Indians were all about totems and spirit animals, and they evoked these traits, and they felt like it made them powerful.
Learning from the natural world.
Yeah. And so I feel like I'm like not remotely prepared to speak in depth about that.
Yeah.
But it is an interest. It's a recent interest of mine.
Well, and that's cool. That's a cool angle I hadn't thought too much about. Where I hear that connect, that's perhaps easier to talk about is sort of, as I've talked in some of these episodes with people who would identify sort of with paganism or practices, which are deeply actually embedded in the church. But we do that in a similar way with the seasons, the symbols of the seasons, right? Learning from that. It's speaking of it's taken me a long time. I used to always say I hate winter. It's taken me a long time to realize that somewhere deep within me, I need that darkness and that cold and that hibernation and that withdrawal.
Yeah.
To sort of illustrate that point a little bit.
Anything that is uncomfortable, I learned this on that rafting trip too. It's like, label it and then really dive deep into why. Yeah. So like, for example, if there's a person that rubs you the wrong way, you could just create your whole narrative about why that person sucks. Or you can say, why am I responding this way to that person? What does it say about me?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorite psychological statements of what you can't stand about someone else is actually a reflection of what you don't like on yourself.
Projection.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's good stuff right there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
But and I feel like I don't want to stray so far away from what we're trying to accomplish in the church. I'm very fascinated by nature and by animals and things like that. But also, I don't want to discredit the fact that participating in communion and, saying prayers on kneelers, those things are, again, so important to me. Coming back to church is, again, resetting that stage for me to be open to more spirituality.
Yeah. Well, and we don't have time to go into this. We'll have to do another episode or something sometime. But that's all really a microcosm of an example of what we're talking about.
Right.
Because we see it as surface level stuff, but it is calling us into something much deeper, right?
Yeah.
So kneeling, the mechanics of that, confession, you can go in there and just say the words. That's also bearing and being vulnerable and handing over those parts of us we don't like to touch. The Eucharist, right? What is that? Well, we've ceremonialized it, but that was a group of people who had deep, intimate, vulnerable relationships together, and they were sharing a meal.
Yeah.
So it's in every day, all parts of our life, all the time, but we've separated.
You've uncovered something for me. Another way that I connect with spirituality is, my love language is quality time. So for me, the way that someone can show me that they value me or care about me the most is by carving out time for me. And so, I have had fascinating and really strong connecting conversations with people over breakfast, or over beer. It's interesting how, I say breakfast and beer, and I don't list lunch or dinner. Yeah. But I think in my professional world, I'm constantly going out with coworkers or clients for lunch or dinner.
You do dinner with home, and
yeah. But breakfast is kind of almost this sacred beginning of the day opportunity to it sets the pace, or I think it's a lot easier to be vulnerable after a beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it's that off the clock, reflective time period of the day, if you're doing it at the appropriate time.
Yeah. That's nice. I mean, that in and of itself could be a rhythm, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you got? Anything else you want to name? I want to be respectful of your time.
No. Did this go even a fraction of how you thought this was
great.
Go?
Yeah,
okay.
Man, it's always a joy to be with you and chat and talk and explore these things. So
yeah,
I'm thankful for your willingness to do it. And
I think everything we talked about today could be explored in a much deeper level. So if ever you want to bring one of those topics back up for an episode, I'm your guy.
I was going to say we went a lot of places, and you could really deep dive into any number of things we brought up. So that's fun.
Well, anytime. Let me know.
All right, brother. Well, hey, I appreciate you. I love you guys.
I appreciate you and love you.
Thanks for not only journeying with me in this endeavor, but in life. And we'll do it again sometime.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, brother.